It's more than just a show. It's community. It's the Stillwater Morning Scramble with Steve Daniels on the Triple Play Sports Radio Network.
Stillwater's Morning Scramble, it's 8:21, and really nice out, 60 degrees, right around there.
It's going to be a good day.
Is this unbelievable as far as... There's the mayor, Will Joyce is in. He's back from the Big Apple.
I am. Good morning, Steve.
How long were you in New York?
Just a couple days last week. I was at a 2-day conference there.
Okay, where do you
Tuesday,
meet
Wednesday.
when you do that?
Where do I meet?
Yeah, where was the meeting?
Well, so this was put on, it's called the Yale Mayor's College, so it's put on by Yale University, but they do the first day at the Yale Club in New York, which is right there by Grand Central Station, and then the second day was at the New York Public Library. And it was, the first day is just about 30 mayors from around the country that gather just in a room and have pretty kind of open seminar-type discussions about different issues that face cities around the country, and they share sort of success stories and ways they've addressed issues around whether it's transportation or just sort of infrastructure funding, lots of issues that came up around civic services and that sort of thing. So, cities like Buffalo, New York, and Pittsburgh, and I was sitting next to the mayor from Culver City, California, and a few other, mostly bigger towns. Stillwater is probably the smallest town represented.
Culver City has a big silver and gold history, right?
I don't know.
I think so.
I don't know. They're sort of home to a bunch of motion picture studios now, so
Yeah.
and right in the middle of LA. So he's got all kinds of really interesting problems to deal with, being sort of fully surrounded by LA.
So what do you learn from
Just
that
it's
situation? They still
great
have
to
road
see-
problems, and right?
They do. I
Yeah.
mean, well, that's one of the things is to see that it's the problems we have here aren't necessarily unique. Certainly, the circumstances are different everywhere, but a lot of the same issues that we face, certainly around funding and around citizen engagement, and just finding creative solutions to the same problems that we've all been dealing with for a long time. It's nice to sort of be around and see other folks who are dealing with similar issues, and whether they're in
Pittsburgh
or Miami or wherever. So that's helpful, again, just to kind of find other folks who are answering or trying to answer the same questions we are. And there's lots of good discussion. One of the things we talked a lot about is engaging citizens and getting folks more involved in the process of seeing things, and using data more transparently within the city, and having people have better access to the information that we have access to. So saw a lot of good ideas around those sorts of things. And then the second day is actually part of the Yale CEO Conference. And so the second day is at the public library, and they have the same 30 mayors, and then they bring in about 30 or 40 CEOs from companies, including places like American Airlines and Pepsi, and some really large public kind of companies,
Sure.
and some smaller ones. And that day kind of focuses more on sort of talking about the future and what's happening in tech, and what's happening in global politics, and sort of things like tariffs, which we don't necessarily, doesn't sound like it has a whole lot of impact here, but if you talk to Justin Mingus over at the Chamber, and you hear about the kind of businesses that have tried to come into Stillwater, or have looked at Stillwater, but then given steel tariffs and that sort of thing, that the global geopolitical economic climate affects those businesses that may be able to come here, or might have come here. So hearing about what those types of folks see coming down the pike in terms of technology especially, and that sort of thing, just a really interesting discussion, and a lot of really great information. So
do you the public input thing, which is what you're going for
Yeah.
tonight? We'll just tie that into
Absolutely.
There is a big meeting tonight at 5:30.
Yeah.
If you're, say, a city like Buffalo, New York, or Pittsburgh, where you might feel your voice is even smaller than
Yeah.
here, most people, if they want to get to know the mayor, you can actually have coffee with the mayor here.
Yeah.
Maybe you can't in Pittsburgh. I don't know. You probably can.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably could under certain circumstances. Yeah, I mean, he's got a lot more people to have coffee
Yeah,
with.
but you
I
just couldn't,
suppose,
just because of the
it's-
number situation.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think one of the things that I see from some of those bigger cities, in the way they have, they just have more city staff devoted to those issues, and to citizen engagement and that sort of thing. So they have a whole department that gathers city data on road funding and finance and where things went and project where their projects are in the pipeline and statistics around all the different things that happen in the city, and they are able to make that available and make it much more accessible to people. So that there are certainly positives and negatives from being bigger and being smaller, and I agree. But it's funny is that you hear some of the same things. We talk here sometimes about how we wish people took better advantage of some of these opportunities, right? I mean, I hope turnout for this transportation town hall tonight is great, but historically we haven't had a whole lot of people who show up at stuff like this, and talking to other mayors about how do you engage people better, how do you get people involved. They see those same problems, whether it's a big town or a small town, and they've we talked about creative ways to try to get folks to take an active role, and part of that really is, I think the biggest part of it really, and hearing from other folks about this, is that they just don't believe it matters, right? And I think sometimes that's valid. Certainly, I think sometimes it's not, but sometimes it is. People just go, why would I go show up and talk to them? It's not going to matter, right? They've already made a decision. They already know what they're going to do.
I get the idea, Will, that's part of the message here is you haven't already made up your mind.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's what we're trying to, we are trying to demonstrate and to help people see that these decisions are made after these discussions, right? We have to know what people want us to do. And it's really a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I mean, if you don't show up and don't voice your opinion, and then your opinion's not followed, of course we didn't make a decision based on your opinion because we didn't know it. So if people just say, well, it's not going to matter what I say, so I just won't say anything, there's no way to ever fix the loop, right? So,
and my guess is you tend to, and this is not Stillwater, this is everywhere, the same people tend to be the ones to show up to each event.
Yeah,
is that fair?
I absolutely. And again, that is part of that discussion where you kind of hear that from other places and go, okay, that's not just Stillwater, that's not just a town like ours, and it's the same thing. You have the same relatively small group of folks who kind of dominate the discussion a lot of times, and that's again, those are folks who feel like they can make a difference and they have opinions to voice, and that's good. We don't want to get rid of those folks. We just want to bring more people into that fold who feel like they can influence what's happening in their city, and that they're people, we are listening to them, and we want to know, especially on transportation projects we're going to talk about tonight. There are a number of things that have been on the list that at some point somebody decided these are the transportation projects that we need to do, and we've talked about them a couple meetings ago. Things like widening Sanger or widening 19th in different places, or other projects around town where we kind of look at it. I look at it personally and say, is this really what people in town want us to spend this money on?
Or have you just decided that's what you need? Is
it just, it was at some point it ended up on the list and it's just kind of worked its way up, and now it's next, so we need to know that. We need to understand that. And I think I hope people understand that this really, truly is an effort to get public comment, to get public direction on where they want us to go transportation-wise, and where we should spend the money. It's a limited amount of funding we have on transportation. We have to make decisions about where to take the limited resources we have, and we have way more needs than we have resources. And so at some point, somebody has to make a decision about it's better to spend this money on Project A than it is to spend it on Project B, because we can't do both.
Right. One of your quotes in the paper, and you can correct the text that you meant, the context that you meant it in, because I don't have it in front of me, but was about we assume that people may or may not want to spend money on that, but we're not sure. I mean, because you just can go, well, they wouldn't want to spend that amount of money. And I was talking to Michelle earlier, and I said, sometimes I think, and I know you can't control how much you have available, but I think sometimes we underestimate the public, maybe, and the fact that if, this is just an observation, if we think that it's being spent correctly, I think people are willing, with their tax dollars, maybe even pay more. But for instance, and I use the school resource officer as an example. I think if it's something that people believe in and they think, okay, my dollar is going to actually go where it's supposed to go, because we're cynical and pessimistic and just by nature, then I think maybe people are more understanding that it does take money to pave our roads and pay our teachers and pay the SROs.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yes, I think that's fair. I think I think part of the problem when you see objection to raising more funding for any
Sure.
of those things is, well, you haven't spent the money you already have well, and so therefore you're not going to get any more. And I understand that argument. I do. I think a lot of times it is based though on a fairly limited view of the situation, right? So this road over here that I think needs to be fixed hasn't been fixed. Therefore, you have not been spending any of your transportation funding correctly.
Right.
Right. And while yes, that road may need to be fixed, having a full understanding of where that money has gone and why it's been spent the way it's been spent maybe changes your viewpoint on, well, okay, now I understand why this road still hasn't been fixed, right? Because that money had to go somewhere else. We had a bridge that needed to be replaced. We had, whatever other infrastructure needs to be done. And so sometimes, not every time, sometimes that judgment of they haven't been spending this money correctly is based on a somewhat limited view, right, or a fairly myopic view of what they think needs to be done in town.
Yeah, I have no doubt. Where I live, the roads are in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
I don't live that far from Lakeview, and it was just finished, the new version, when I moved over there.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I have any potholes or anything really. So when everybody complains about, well, have you seen our roads?
Yeah.
It's like, our roads aren't so bad because I don't hit potholes in my day.
It depends on where you drive,
right?
It just depends on the viewpoint you have and the roads you have to drive on every day to get where you're going. And that's, again, not to say that certain complaints aren't entirely valid. And problems that need to be addressed that haven't been addressed. But I think in the context of that discussion of, maybe we assume we know what the public wants, there are certain decisions that get made around what from an engineering perspective you would say that's not a very good use of the money, right? If we're just going to go put a thin layer of asphalt over a road that's in rough shape and really needs to be reconstructed, because if you just put a new layer of asphalt over it, it's going to end up pitted and potholed again really quickly, and so you really kind of just wasted that layer.
That's the text you meant that in, right?
Yeah, because so we from a city perspective say it doesn't sound like a very effective use or a very reasonable use of taxpayer money to go spend it on a project that's not going to last very long, right? We just spent X number of thousands of dollars on to just sort of smooth out a road that is going to end up in bad shape again pretty quickly because the underlying problems are the problems that need to be fixed. Well, we don't have the money to do all of the full reconstruction that needs to be done, but we'll just put a patch over it real quick, right? Well, those things deteriorate really quickly when you do that. And so you say, well, is it worth taking that 50 grand or whatever it costs, and I have no idea, on the scale, that kind of money, and spending it on something that's a temporary short-term fix instead of putting it back into another project where we're going to have better impact and a better long-term result, right? So one of the things we will talk about today, and that Monty Carnes, our transportation director, has talked about quite a bit, is why we do things like thin surface overlays on 19th Street, right? Or newer roads, Western or Lakeview, where we've reconstructed those roads, but then 2 or 3 years later, we've gone back and done another thin surface overlay of asphalt, and people say that road's in great shape. Why are you fixing it? We're not fixing it. What we're doing is putting a very cheap surface overlay on it to make sure it stays nice, so that it extends the life of the road, and that amount of money invested there has a much bigger long-term benefit to the community than it would if we just threw a couple of asphalt patches on somewhere else, which are just going to deteriorate again because we haven't fixed the road right. So those kinds of before I was involved in city council and really diving deep into these kinds of questions, there's a lot of this stuff that just doesn't it's a big picture to kind of get your head around, right? And to understand why certain investments get made and why certain ones don't. But we don't want to make the assumption that everybody understands that big picture. And so we want to give them the full picture as often as we can, as much as we can, to say, here's what the circumstances are that we're trying to work around. Here's what we think makes sense. If you don't agree, it's your money. If you prefer, if it's worth it to you to have 6 months of a smooth road for that money, great. We can go do that, but we at least want that decision to be made with full knowledge of the circumstances. That's
one of those tough things about politics. Are you there to use your wisdom?
Yep.
You know where I'm going,
yep.
And do the right thing, if it's sort of like, well, Custer says this is what we need to do, so we're going to do it, even though the outcome is not ideal.
It is the fundamental problem of representative democracy.
And you are not Custer, by the way, in that analogy.
Thank you. But it is the fundamental problem of representative democracy, right? I mean, I'm elected to represent the community in these sort of decisions, and I spend time and energy learning about the circumstances and why transportation is the way it is and what streets, I have to gather a lot of information together to try to make these decisions well. Well, if I'm one of the citizens in town and I've elected somebody, I want them to go, I want to elect somebody who I think is a decent decision maker, who is going to be curious and learn things, and is going to have more information than I as a citizen would normally have, and trust them to some degree to use that information and to use their knowledge and the expertise that they pick up along the way to make a good decision on my behalf. But at the same time, there are some issues where I want to go to that representative and say, listen, I think I have plenty of information on this issue. I want you to do X, right? I want you to vote this way on that bill. I know what I'm talking. I have the information I need to know which way you should vote. And as a representative, you have to, I know John Talley's been in here before talking about there's a certain way he feels about a certain issue, but when you ask constituents, they may disagree. And he is a representative of his constituents, so which way do you vote?
It's a tough call. And are they informed enough?
Yeah.
And on the opposite, as a voter, from our perspective, if we got a great body of counselors, which I think we do, you trust them.
Yeah.
But if it's not the case and you don't feel that they represent you, then you have every right to stand up and go, hold it. You're not really, you know what I mean? Yes. It depends on what we think of you guys.
And absolutely it does. It does depend on, and that's, from my perspective when it comes to electing people at any level of office, I think my primary concern is generally, do I think this person is going to be given enough, if they were given latitude to make decisions on their own for me, do I trust that they're going to make good decisions, right? Because at some level, I am not, at a state level or a federal level, I am never going to have the level of information I would need to make an informed decision about some of this stuff. So I'm going to vote for people who I believe have the character and the value and the intelligence and the wisdom to make good decisions when they're given that information. So I think you have to have that, right? That's really hard, right? Because basically what we're describing is, let's elect politicians we trust. Well, politicians are like the least trusted group of people on the planet for many good reasons, probably. But and I think part of the problem is that I've been in this situation now for a little more than 3 years, where I try to explain to people why I would do this or that, or and at one level you sort of go. I talked about this, I think, with Michelle in the paper. I want to say, listen, you had an opportunity to come here and talk. You had an opportunity to come participate. If you didn't do it, well, sorry, that's on you. And you didn't participate, so you don't get to complain. Well, same with the representative piece of it. But really, truly, it's my responsibility as that representative. If I'm going to make a decision that I think is based upon my judgment and why I feel this is the way it needs to happen, it's my responsibility to come back to you and say, let me explain why this is the way it is, and give you an opportunity to see the factors behind the way I made my decision, right? Because it's too easy for us to sort of sit up there and say, okay, well, I decided, and when someone complains about it, you just go, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm not even going to engage. I think we as representatives in government at any level, local, state, federal, have to do a better job of helping people understand the circumstances that we're dealing with, right? I mean,
but you're describing dialogue rather than,
and that's
here's how it is.
Yes, I mean, it needs to be dialogue. It needs to be, we need to make at every level of government a better effort at helping people understand the factors that go into some of these decisions, and not, I mean, I don't expect Senator Langford to come explain to me, Senate intelligence or whatever committee he sits on where there's a foreign intelligence aspect to some decision he's making, but I do expect him to come after a vote that's controversial in some way to lay out as much of what he can of explains why, and to help me see why he made a good decision if he believes he did, and that's my responsibility too. I think that's the responsibility of the city.